Hey everybody, this is Stan Wanglin, your old pal, and thank you for joining me again for episode 22, I think. I've lost track of these initial episodes on Just Thinking 2022. Thank you for joining me. I hope you're liking the little daily psychology tips I'm putting out under YouTube Shorts. They're under 15 seconds, and I'm not kidding you, it's fun doing those. There's a lot of motivating things in there, and there's a lot of really good advice in there that I can tell you the truth that myself and other psychologists and other counselors and therapists have used with people for years and years. Excuse me, I have a dry throat here today. That don't require hours and hours of lecturing to people, but are some good little tips for folks sometimes in terms of rational thinking or some useful things to do. So I hope you like those, and I hope you're enjoying these shows. We've had a lot going on in the world, obviously. Just Thinking also has a lot of humorous things in the past. I love to do that. Things with entertainment, sports, all kinds of things in life. Philosophy, religion, theology, whatever. But we have a situation going on in the Ukraine right now, which rightly so takes a lot of people's attention. You have inflation in America. You've got all the situation in Russia with people trying to adjust to what Putin is doing there, and there's people who are against things, and Russians who are misguided or don't know what they are for, or are for certain things that are not the same that we are, or the Ukrainian people are, or NATO, or the rest of the world. So it can get very confusing. If you like these shows and find them helpful, which I hope that you do, even if it's for one or two people out there, sometimes for hundreds, sometimes for thousands, of people will watch a given show and hopefully get something out of it. There's all different viewpoints about what's going on in the world today, and maybe some ways that we should try and perceive it, understand it, decide what we're going to do to act or not act upon it. And again, I hope this show is a little bit of a voice of reason, or one voice of reason in a very complex world that we live in right now. Ukraine is a very, very difficult situation. It could be an exercise if I was doing team building again, which I did quite a bit of, and you'd always take these impossible situations like a survival scenario, or the classic ones in psychology where they talked about moral development, and your mother or father needed the one cancer drug that was locked up in a pharmacy. What would you do? And things like that. And people are put in these positions of their emotions, their values and beliefs, and the reality of the situation that's at hand. And sometimes those things are not intersecting. They're not very clear or layered upon one another. Sometimes they're at odds to one another, or in order to do the moral thing, it could be not cost effective or disastrous. So, there's very complex situations in life, and that's what I wanted this show to be about with the Ukraine. As this situation evolves, of course, it's a wrong term of even using, where people will take a knee-jerk reaction. Well, the people in the Ukraine certainly aren't taking a knee-jerk reaction, or people in Estonia or Latvia or Poland on the border of Russia, or any of the European countries. I think the United States has taken a very good role, and NATO has, and people in Eastern and Western Europe have, in other countries, where they've tried to say, hey, this is the whole new ball game, saber rattling with nuclear weapons. There could be an accident, invading sovereign countries for whatever reason. And once you get beyond all the individual countries' self-interest or their differing perceptions on things, I think what you get to is the fact that if you want to be a sensible person, and if we're going to solve this situation, if there is a solution, then we really have to be rational thinkers. I know that sometimes, you just have to be a good thinker, and, some of it may be even a little bit irrational at times, but, that's tempered, or it motivates you to go in another direction. But it's very important for people to understand. I think one of the key points of rational emotive behavior therapy that Albert Ellis talked about, which is really good for people to understand, and probably your grandparents had it, or people who are very pragmatic, or work on a farm, or work with their hands, or just do things and have to make life and death decisions, is that when all is said and done, there is the world the way that it is, and it is what it is, versus the way we want it to be. And we would like Putin to be reasonable, or we would like an American president or Congress to be reasonable, or we would like people, if they're protesting a legitimate cause, not to tear up the goddamn town, or we would like the police to protect and serve and not target out certain individuals. We would like to be able to have countries that could be assertive in their self-interest but not aggressive in autocracies. And other governments would say, gee, it would be nice, or it would be better if we had countries that didn't play around so much and the population was better controlled. We might view that as an autocracy. There are differences in the way that cultures view things, in the way that tribal leaders, and that's what we're talking about, tribalism, nationalism, people that see themselves, their allegiances to an idea, their country, or some particular idea, some emotional idea or whatever, and they may not be thinking rationally at times. And you can have a combination of being very emotional about something and also being completely rational about it. But this situation with the Ukraine, it's different for different people. For people in the Ukraine, yeah, they're being totally rational by defending their freedom and getting their family out of there, or hunkering down, and telling people, hey, listen, if you're a citizen and you want to be engaged in a democracy, you're going to have to fight for your country. And to be quite honest with you, we've done that in the United States many times. We did it in the Revolutionary War. We did it in our Civil War. We've done it in different movements in our country, and we've done that. People have fought and died within our country for what they believed. So it's not like we don't have skin in the game. We also went over to Europe in World War I and went over to Europe in World War II. We've been engaged in Southeast Asia and a million other things, the Middle East, all kinds of things. And one of the things that we've learned from that, I think, and Russia learned from that when it was the Soviet Union, they went bankrupt in Afghanistan, just as we did. It was a no exit, no win, situation. Whatever the thought at the time was, there was no exit strategy or whatever. And you have the same thing right now happening to Putin. You can't believe that they'll do it again, regardless of what happens in the long run. Better minds than mine that I'm reading, or I'm a student of history, a student of military history and things like that, amongst many other things. I think it's very clear that Putin really miscalculated things, and not the need in many Russians to sit and want their former empire back in some way. I think they also want freedom too. Many of them, or more democracy than they have. But they don't want to be viewed as second-class citizens, and he can manipulate that stuff with a significant number of his population there. And then there's a whole bunch of other people who want no part of this crap. Like we didn't, many people in our country, when it came to the Middle East or it came to Vietnam or different things, and said, not a good idea. That domino theory, from the 50s and 60s and 70s, kind of wacky. And you can see the result now. The Vietnamese people, North Vietnamese, were our enemies, and they're basically pretty darn nice people. They were colonized by the French and blah, blah, blah. It was a mess. And people make disastrous decisions. They get involved in things, and shit goes sideways, for lack of a better term. Now, this is what has to do with my little spiel here today on the Ukraine. We did not invade the Ukraine. Poland didn't, we didn't, NATO didn't, and the Ukraine are not our NATO allies. They are not. They may be a country that we're friendly towards, or they may be a country that we're trying to see come along towards more democracy and enter NATO for whatever reasons. If they'd like to do that, they're a sovereign nation. They have all those things. But they are a separate entity from us. We do have an alliance with England, and we do have an alliance with France and Italy and Germany and a whole host of other NATO countries. And those things have been agreed to, and, whether it be Putin or anybody else, people understand that. And, I don't know whether he thinks he's going to try and break that, but I think it's pretty clear that, no, in that situation, the United States is not going to back down, or these other countries. They cannot. That's an impossible situation, but that is not the rational way the world is with the Ukraine right now. And I have to say the unpopular thing, because we live in a world that creates alternate realities and a world that has knee jerk reactions. And people don't think about strategic decisions, and they don't think about tactical decisions on things. I think that the existing president, Joe Biden, is doing the right thing. I would assume that if this happened under Donald Trump's watch and he got involved in a similar situation, he, whatever, he would not be looking to invade the country either, or George Bush or any. There is there is no match between NATO and the United States and Russia in terms of military might, regardless of what you're seeing and everything. The United States is the greatest. It's the only superpower, more or less. It doesn't mean that countries don't have nuclear weapons. India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. Just to put it in perspective, that's one of the things that people worry about all the time. That Pakistan and India are going to use. India are going to fire off a nuclear weapon at one another. But that's for another story, you know. But even though its power is greatly diminished compared to the 70s and 80s and 60s and everything else like that with Russia, it's still, when Putin saber rattles and says he has still a significant number of nuclear weapons, he still has platforms, which means mechanisms, to deliver those nuclear weapons. And who knows what? If, just like with any kind of a dictator, and he's a dictator, you can call it what you want, but he's a dictator. Just like any dictator, if he sees he's doomed, what the hell's the difference for him? He might pull a bonehead move and say, who cares? Boom, they fire one, we'll fire one. Oh, this is what I consider this. Boom, away they go. Is that a possibility? I think it could be. I don't think it's in his playbook. The greater possibility in this situation with the United States is something that goes sideways. The fog of war, a mistake. Somebody says, hey, looks like they're going to fire one. Fire one. Away something goes. Some crazy incident that triggers a nuclear war. It's what John Kennedy and McNamara and the people in 1963 were terrified of with the Cuban Missile Crisis. That when the Russian ships came to the line of the red line, man, what's going to happen? We fire one over the bow, and then the next one is going right in the ship. Is there going to be a nuclear war? And believe me, I was a kid at the time, and you could see all the forces in New York City, where I lived, all organized, going to beach defenses and Nike missiles being taken out at Fort Tilden and other things like that. There was serious stuff. So stuff can go haywire. Now, nobody has ever fought, we've never had a nuclear war before. We have never used nuclear weapons after World War II. And it's been an incredible deterrent. I mean, it's just not an option that's on the table. And that's the idea, that it's so horrific, it's the ultimate deterrent. The Soviet Union has Russia has a little bit of a different thing, where they say that escalating to that point can de-escalate something, which means that you scare the shit out of somebody. However, we live in very highly polarized times right now. We live with people don't share, a shared sense of reality. We have people that have perceptions all over the place, that people don't work together in their various governments. We have a situation where democracies across the globe have diminished versus autocracies. And people are pulling all kinds of crazier acts. You have different kinds of cyber kinds of issues. You have different global economics, climate change, all kinds of factors which come into the fog of war. Now, what does this have to do with the Ukraine again? I think it's pretty clear where I'm leading. If I was the president of the United States, I would certainly understand why the Ukrainians and Premier or President Zelensky is saying, "Hey, man, we need your help. We need you to do this and blah blah blah." However, the narrative that he started to use now by saying, "Not all the words, not the words. It's all talking." No. That's a big error, my friend. That's a big error, and it's understandable, because this is where he's locked into like a thinking, feeling, doing model. And while he's thinking about all this, his emotions are as high as could be, and rightly so. His country's being decimated before his eyes, and he's desperate. However, when you're looking at things as a critical thinker, when you're looking at things tactically, when you're looking at things strategically, when you're looking at the world the way that it is, the worst possible scenario, the worst possible thing we could do, in my humble opinion, for the Ukrainian people and everybody else would be to have a no-fly zone, would be to have boots on the ground in some kind of way. Even that deal about selling planes through Poland and something like that, yeah, that's right on that border, man. That's floating right around there. I can see floating that one there, supplying them and everything. It's been clear. We're banning them, pushing the sanctions. I mean, when somebody says we haven't done anything, tell that to the people in California or where I live and the gas pump and everything else. Yeah, we're doing a lot economically. We're doing a lot for your country. We're doing a lot from the taxpayers' money and have been for a long, long time. So I understand that you're hot, and understandably hot, and terrible things are happening to you, and it's a tragedy. But America cannot be the policeman everywhere on the globe. The Ukraine is not the only place where, autocrats and illegal stuff happens or people are refugees. It's the one that we are attending to right now because it's tied in to a lot of things that get high attention. And as it should. I'm not saying we should not help the Ukrainians. I think the Ukraine is going to defeat the Russians, to be honest with you. I don't think they can sustain anything like this. They may come in and roll over the country or do this or that. They're not going to win in the long run. Nobody does in situations like this. Occupying countries never do. It's one of the worst things that you can imagine. And Putin has made a terrible mistake. So we don't want to compound that mistake and not recognize the world as it is. These situations do happen as the powers of autocracy and democracies and other forms of governments collide and have different interests and are on each other's borders and things like that. And we have to use great wisdom and restraint and power when we need to do it. The sanctions are very powerful, and there may be other things, supplying people, whatever. It's a careful walk. It's a careful line. And keep in mind with this, if you had a no-fly zone and a situation occurred and there was any kind of warfare that included the United States or NATO, if you think it's bad now for the Ukraine would be wiped off the map. And what's the evidence of that? World War II in Europe. I mean, everybody lost on that. The place is just wiped off the map. Stalingrad, London bombed. They weren't wiped up, but in Germany, my God Almighty, places in Italy, France, all over, wiped off the map. Just devastated. Japan, cities decimated. You don't want that. And that's going to happen whether it be a nuclear attack, or that's going to happen if there's a land war. The United States is beyond a formidable foe. And then you've got other incredible militaries that are there. The UK is not a bunch of schlubs. The other NATO partners are not a bunch of schlubs with anything else like that. They're not a bunch of green kids or anything else like that. And I have family members who are in the active military right now. They're very highly trained. So, can we have these no-fly zones? Can we have these other things? No. In my opinion, no, we can't. We have to proceed like this. We have to let the Ukrainian people and other options and get them the equipment that they need to do what they need to do in there and to bolster them up in every single way that we can, tactically and strategically, that won't precipitate World War III. Case closed. That's just the world the way that it is. That's just what has to happen. There's too much risk in the other thing. And if the shoe was on the other foot, I would understand that if it was for us. And I do understand that people trying to berate people or shilt them and make them shamed and guilted. You got to do this for me. And I would be doing the same thing. But that doesn't mean that we have to respond to that. And that's where reality testing comes in. So Am I all in for the Ukraine? Absolutely. All in to a point. All into a point. Because by not going all into crazy ideas or ones that the world will not sustain just due to the fact that this is the way the world is, that ensures the survival of the Ukraine. Even if for a period of time it was under the heel of Russia. At least in the end, the land would be whole and people would be there and situation could change back to normal. Not by precipitating World War III. No. There's only one last thing that I want to do in this show, and it has to do with rational thinking, and I wanted people to think about. And I hope you listen to the 20 minutes or so of this show. A wonderful book by Lao Tzu, The Art of War. Very, very important little lessons about things, which were very wise then, a long time ago, and now. And one of them is always allow a desperate enemy a means of escape. You see how I remember that? My good buddy John Lishuk, fellow psychologist, I would always say this all the time. And it's a good piece of advice for interpersonal relationships. When you have somebody by the short hairs, and you can really squeeze them, and you can really take them down right to the end. Well, in the art of war, if you're a commanding general or you're in charge of things, when you've got those people trapped in a cave someplace, and there's 100 of them in there, and you've got 5,000 people, but you got to go in there in a limited area, and those people there's no way out of there. Well, their level of fighting is not going to be just come in and kill me. You're going to kill me anyway. So I'm going to be like a berserker, man. I'm going to go wild. I'm going to take as many of you with me as I can. So the casualties will be much greater than if you gave them after you inflicted pain on them, a sufficient amount so they wouldn't come back, if you allowed them, as a desperate enemy, a means of escape. You've already beaten them. You've already achieved your goals. By decimating them, you're going to wind up actually increasing your own losses at an unacceptable rate where you didn't need to. You know? So you have to put your emotions on the back burner, and you have to think tactically, and you have to think strategically. To allow a desperate enemy a means of escape. And this is very important with Putin. This is important with any country. This is important with any individual, that you don't put somebody where they have nothing to lose. And that's why I think with sanctions, no-fly zones, and everything else like that, sure, in our best interest, in the best interest of democracy, in the best interest of the Ukraine and everything else like that, yeah, in NATO, in our way of life or our value system or our culture, yeah, you want to put the hammer on this guy. You want to really set a really firm limit. Pain. You want to give pain. But at the same time, you want to use a little behaviorism, the carrot and stick. The pain stops when the behavior stops. These are natural consequences. You do bad things, there's bad consequences. Now, what happens when you do that in real life with your kids or somebody else? Somebody has a habit of doing something, you set a limit. Hey, surprise, surprise, from the world of psychology. The behaviors increase for a while. That's called testing the limits. People want to test the limits to see if you're serious. They've got a long-standing habit. They don't believe that it's going to end. But you keep the sanctions on. You set the limit. You don't make the meal for the person. You don't make their bed. You don't pay them the wage when they don't work for it. But if you're smart, when you can, you allow for a means of escape. Oh, if you start coming to work, you start making some money. Or, whatever. We don't have to box you into a corner. So let's think about that with the Ukraine. Let's think about it with everyday life. That's what I'm thinking. I think what we're, to be realistic, I put a daily note on today that said that stop the doomsday scrolling as much. Yeah, it's a lot of bad things happening with everything else like that, but people are pulling their hair out to such an extent, bad stuff is going on in the world all the time, including the Ukraine, including things here, including things in Mexico, including things in Venezuela, including things with drug cartels, including things in the Middle East, and everything else. There's a lot of bad things that happen, and there's a lot of good things. All we can do is deal with them the best we can. Not obsess about them and just deal with them just purely emotionally. Now, sadly, I'm not trying to be silly and say that people in the Ukraine, or you don't feel bad for people, or want to do everything you can for them, or stand in solidarity. Absolutely, those are legitimate things. But you can't do what you can't do. And neither can the Ukrainians. I think they're doing fine, and better than fine. And I think they're going to come out the winners in this. Absolutely. So, again, I hope you liked today's show. And if you did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment or whatever you'd like. And thanks for listening. And, God bless all the people all over the world, and particularly Ukraine right now. Just a horrible situation. They're marvelous, marvelous strength and courage. And let's do everything we can do sensibly to help them and not to hurt them, because we give in to their very legitimate emotional distress. I'm sure all of us would be the same. But we don't want to precipitate World War III and make a bad situation a lot worse. Okay? Alrighty. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.